has already put forward their 2019 opportunity agenda, and that is Colorado Rising Action. Its executive director, Michael Fields, rejoins us here on Business for Breakfast. Michael, good morning. Welcome back, and Merry Christmas.
Good morning. It's good to be back on with you, Jimmy.
Hey, it's great to talk with you. So you've come out with this agenda. Let me ask you, why would you even bother putting forward an agenda for the legislative session when you know Republicans are in the minority, especially in the House, but also in the Senate?
Well, I think part of it is creating a vision for, what the state should look like. And a lot of the stuff we talk about are stuff that are already in place, that are working well for us, that have helped us have a number one economy in the country. But, hoping that some of this stuff isn't reversed. And we know we have to keep making the argument for these positive policy items. And so we thought, hey, let's put a broad agenda out there. Let's talk about things like Tabor and transportation and education a little bit, and make sure that we're also contributing to the conversation that's happening down at the Capitol.
Now, you've narrowed this down to 5 different items to focus on, which I think is important. You don't want to have a 200-point list, because then nobody will be able to understand exactly what you're saying. But if you delve in to some specific issues, that's where the value can really be. So I want to take these point by point. And you mentioned Tabor, the Taxpayers' Bill of Rights. And this is an important one, especially we saw a challenge that thankfully failed. It wasn't exactly a challenge, but a request from Governor Hickenlooper, our lame duck outgoing governor, to the state Supreme Court to settle this issue between the Gallagher Amendment from 1982 dealing with property taxes and then the Taxpayer Bill of Rights restriction on raising taxes with only a vote of the people that was passed in 1992. So we know this issue is certainly going to be coming up as part of it. You're emphasizing the Tabor component and protecting Tabor. Why does that topic matter for starters?
Well, it matters because of what we saw in the election this last year, that, Democrats swept in, but voters said, we're not giving you any more money. I mean, they shot down the education tax increase. They shot down a transportation tax increase. Tabor is the only thing that stops us from massive, huge government on the state level and the local level. And so saying, voters like that part of it. They put Democrats in, but they didn't want them, having more and more money without coming back and asking them. And so I think Tabor's an important thing. And you've already seen, Governor Hickenlooper go after it. And there's ideas afloating of just lifting the Tabor cap a couple $100 million. There's enterprising different things. So this is something that I think all Coloradans should keep a close watch on. If they want more money from you, they got to come back and ask.
Yeah, and so in terms of kind of the impact of Tabor, it's certainly been very positive. What are the ways in which you think folks can be advocating for, whether they're legislators or not, for the preservation and protection of Tabor when you know that Democrats are going to be gunning for it in every little way that they can?
Well, look, I think they have to have the conversation, and it's something that we started a couple years ago with a couple other groups here in the state. And just reminding people why it's so popular, reminding legislators, reminding Governor Polis that he ran on saying that people should be able to vote on tax increases. And there's a lot of precedent out there to say this is what an enterprise is and this is what it's not. And when they start going off of that, I think there has to be a threat of suing them for basically, looking at Tabor and saying we're not going to follow it. And so I think there has to be different options. There's not much you can do except have that conversation, talk about it. But it's very popular, and people like being able to vote. And so I think just pushing it back to that and saying you should be in charge of how big government is as a voter, the legislature's trying to get around that and take more of your money and raise taxes in a backdoor way.
Let's talk about energy here. Michael Fields, again, Executive Director of Colorado Rising Action. Oil and gas, very important. We saw the rebuke of this insane setback measure that was put on the ballot in November. And clearly the people of Colorado support the oil and gas industry, but also do advocate for, as you put it, the all-of-the-above energy approach.
Yeah, I think this is a very important issue, and we know, future Governor Polis was somebody who supported 2,000-foot setbacks. So I think there's going to be a conversation within the legislature. 2,500 failed on the ballot. Are they going to do 2,000 or 1,500, which could really devastate the oil and gas industry here in the state? We're talking hundreds of thousands of jobs, a lot of local revenue for things like education. So I think, keeping a close eye on that, and especially in the Senate where there's a 3-seat majority for the Democrats, you have a few, senators that are Democrats that have been big supporters of the oil and gas industry. do they stick with, the will of the people and make sure that we're not increasing these setbacks past the 500 feet, which is where they are right now. So I think this is going to be a very interesting one to watch. I think, people should weigh in. We just had this battle, and if they want to do something different, go back to the people and ask them, if they want to increase setbacks. But I think the answer was clear so far this year.
Well, they could go ahead and move forward with a sort of a death by 1,000 cuts thing, where they do more and more regulation, or they try to advantage the alternative energies to the exclusion of oil and gas. There are other tools than just setbacks, even though Governor-elect Polis certainly has supported setbacks in the past.
No doubt, there's other means, especially using the tax system, using cronyism to prop up certain things, like we do electric cars right now. So yeah, there's no doubt that this is going to be not just setbacks, but I think that's the most immediate, one that a lot of legislators have said, hey, we're going to jump on board to do 2,000 feet or something like that. So I think you're right. It could be much broader, an attack on our energy industry in general in the state.
Yeah, and it is certainly an important one, because not just there are jobs in this state, but it also is bringing investment, a lot of opportunities to Colorado, and so it's crucial to maintain. And not only that, the overall country is benefiting. We are now, Michael Fields, we're now the single largest producer of oil and natural gas on the globe, and Colorado plays a role in that.
Yeah, it's huge. That's a great thing. It's good for our economy. It's good for national security. So I think we need to continue to value. We have some of the toughest regulations in the country here in Colorado already. To pile onto that, to drive it out of the state where it can go to other places, wouldn't be good.
Now, here's the thing on transportation. We had two different measures. One was the bond measure that was put forward for bonding and reprioritization by the Independence Institute. That lost. And it lost, by the way, by an even greater margin than the tax increase proposal put forward by the Denver Chamber of Commerce dealing with transportation. So the big question is what the voters were sending in terms of the message, and then how the legislature should respond to that. For example, last year there was a transportation bill that passed and was signed into law by the governor that includes a more scaled back than the Independence Institute Fix Our Damn Roads proposal, but nevertheless it includes a ballot measure for next year, 2019, in November, on the bonding issue. It seems like that was already rebuked by the voters. What should be done here?
Well, I think this is something that they said, look, we don't want to put new taxes towards this. You have a $30 billion plus budget, and roads should be something that is done out of that. I think they also said we don't want to tie the hands of the legislature of our budget for the next 20 plus years with this kind of bonding measure. And so I think what the legislature has to do is come back and say, okay, is there some different type of plan that we can come up with, maybe a shorter term one, maybe a little bit smaller one like they passed the last couple of years. But I think the answer, the message was not we don't want our roads fixed at all. People are extremely frustrated with that. They want it done. But I think they were a little bit worried of saying, you know what, if there's a recession or something happens, this money could be coming out of other places. Like, legislature, why don't you guys figure this out and deal with it? We're not going to tie your hands, but we're also not going to give you increased revenue. So I think they need to get to work in a bipartisan way to say this doesn't mean that roads need to be neglected. I mean, they're in bad shape here. But I think those two specific proposals were obviously soundly rejected.
And so do you have any thoughts more specifically on what types of things they should be looking for in terms of prioritization? I think the biggest problem is that you've got and we'll talk about education coming up in a moment, but you've got the constitutional requirements for all the spending on education, and you've got the Medicaid increases because Governor Hickenlooper accepted the Medicaid expansion money from the federal government under Obamacare. There are all these requirements in the law now for where our priorities need to go, and then transportation has been kind of pushed by the wayside. How can transportation become a priority, and do you have any thoughts yet on what that might look like?
Well, I think, the fact that we, the last couple of years, have had increased revenue, and we decided to spend it on different stuff. We did put $100 million extra into roads on a short-term basis. We put $250 million more into education beyond what is mandated. We did a para bill where we put $100 million into trying to shore that up a little bit. I think the money is there to do something smaller, and I think that's the message, is saying, look, if this is $100 million bonding that we're going to continue on in order to fix specific projects at a time and say, look, are we doing a good job, fixing these 3 projects or these 5? But also making sure that it's not just in the Denver metro area that this money's going to. I think you're going to see more support for this type of stuff if it's broader, if it's saying, look, Western Slope matters, Southern Colorado matters, the Eastern Plains matter. So I think that has to be a piece-by-piece thing, but I think the money's there to do $150 million, given how the economy's going right now, that revenues are up for the state legislature. They're getting $1.5 billion $1.5 billion more dollars every year. But I think to your point, and I'm sure we'll talk about this at some point, but the healthcare issue and how much of it is eating up the budget is also something that needs to be addressed.
Well, let's go to education first, because this is one where it affects so many countless children in the state of Colorado, and we want to be able to provide the best quality education possible. Great educational opportunities are integral to providing better quality. What are some priorities that you think need to be either focused on for advancement or things that shouldn't be derailed?
Well, this state has been very good bipartisan, putting a bipartisan approach to education in terms of choice, especially. So I'd like to see the legislature continue that and say, look, we care about charter schools. We care about our district schools, obviously, where a majority of our kids go. We care about private schools and home schools. So I think that conversation is just saying we're going to continue to think that parents are the best drivers in terms of where their kids should go, what's best for them. They did equal funding, a bipartisan bill for equal funding for charter schools. They're public schools, too. They deserve the same amount of money that district schools do. So making sure those types of things aren't reversed. But I think conservatives and everybody needs to be talking about teacher pay. We need to get more money into the classrooms and less money into administration. And I think that conversation needs to happen at the district level, where there's the most control over it, but also the state level. We send 65% of the money that we spend on education to districts. And so using that to say, what are these districts coming up with to make sure that money's getting in the classroom, that's getting towards teachers, that's what voters want to see. That's what Coloradans want to see.
Well, and I just want to mention this. Again, we're talking with Michael Fields, Executive Director of Colorado Rising Action. But prior to getting involved with politics and policy, you yourself were a teacher, correct?
Mm-hmm. That's correct. I taught 4th and 6th grade. I'm still the board president of the charter school that I taught at. About 750 kids out in Aurora. So I see this day in and day out with a budget, with what teachers are dealing with. I know that they don't get paid a lot of money, and it's tough for them. And we try to do the best that we can as a charter school to get more money to them. But on some of these districts, you have administrative staff that is ballooning up at a time when teachers aren't getting what they should be.
Well, in 2 points, real briefly, I know that during the campaign, Treasurer Walker Stapleton made a big point of saying, look at all the administrative overhead. Not enough money is going to teachers because so much is going to administration. That's an important point. And point number 2 that actually is encouraging is that Jared Polis, Governor-elect Polis, has been very supportive of charter schools, helped start charter school, and also even brought Bob Schaefer, the former congressman and former chair of the State Board of Education, a Republican, onto his transition team when it comes to education. So that's at least cause for encouragement.
Yeah, there's a lot of encouragement. Governor Polis has started, I think, 3 charter schools in the state. But just looking at the majorities that they have in the state house right now, 17-seat majority in the state house, you're going to see some people who are really tied in closely with the teachers union trying to push certain things. And so I hope that, this remains a bipartisan issue, but I think it's something that we have to watch, given, how extreme some people are in the legislature against school choice, against charter schools, et cetera.
Well, and I just want to reemphasize this point, which I always do every time we have education reform advocates like yourself on the program, is exactly what we were just talking about, is the idea that teacher pay and the overall situation for educators in the school system, in public schools, should increase. It should go up. They should get paid more. We just disagree with how you go about doing this. I mentioned you're past as a teacher because you understand what that's like.
Yeah, I mean, there's no doubt that teachers need more money. I think we should be hammering this as conservatives and Republicans, as anybody who's involved in the process. But saying we don't want to raise taxes $1.6 billion, and thankfully the voters rejected that. The money is there in the system to start that process now, and then you can deal with different funding issues on the local level, local mill levies, et cetera. So I think it was a good outcome this election, but it doesn't mean that we shift the focus from saying that teachers need to get paid more. More money has to get into the classroom to help students.
Again, Michael Fields, our guest. Let's talk about health care. That is something a lot of people think about nationally, but clearly they didn't move forward with any sort of substantial overhaul, repeal and replacement of Obamacare in 2017. And so now we're seemingly stuck with it, notwithstanding a judge's decision that's probably, quite frankly, going to be overturned. But can the state lead on health care issues in any way?
Look, I think it is a broader national issue more than a state issue, but I think there's definitely things that they can do on the state level to increase transparency. But also, I mean, we know that the biggest issue is the fact that the patient is getting further and further away from, the payment system. And so are there certain things that we can do, and I think this has to be a bipartisan approach. Everybody wants costs to go down, quality to go up, access to go up. I think this is one of the toughest issues out there, but people care about it, and we're still not headed in the right direction when it comes to this. And I think, we talked about the budget and Medicaid earlier. I guess my fear is that Medicaid isn't going to be sustainable over the long, long haul for the people who actually need it, and that, there are people that need Medicaid that it's a strong program for. But the more people that you put on and the more providers that decide we're not getting paid enough and we can't handle this, get out of that system, the worse off that we're going to be. So I think we need to really balance, the fact that, hey, we want to, and it's an economic issue, right? There's places in southern Colorado where 40-50% of the people are on Medicaid. We need to bring more economic opportunity there where people don't have to be on Medicaid. So I think this is a broad, tough issue, but I think if the legislature ignores it, they're doing a disservice to Coloradans.
So we just went over 5 different key priorities that you guys are particularly advocating for at Colorado Rising Action. I guess the key question in terms of once you have these priorities in the mindset, what should be sort of the strategic approach of Republicans and conservatives? As you said, 17-seat majority for the Democrats in the state House. They've got a couple seats that they've got for the majority in the state Senate. Republicans clearly at a disadvantage. None of the statewide offices relative to the legislative process are being held by Republicans. So what should be the strategy to advocate for this agenda?
I think that it's focusing on a couple issues, and I think that the key is, and in this last election, I don't think people saw what are Republicans standing for. What are their issues that they're really advocating on and having ideas on? And I don't think that the voters saw that. So I think the key for Republicans here is to say, you know what, we're going to focus in on certain issues, and we're going to talk about those. And so at the end of the legislative session, people can say, oh, Republicans are for fixing our roads, with a smaller bonding measure. They're for paying teachers more. They're for defending our right to vote on tax increases. I think we need to have that definition of what they're fighting for or standing for, and provide some other ideas that are kind of outside the box a little more. I mean, Opportunity Zone program was an interesting thing on the federal level. Is there something on the state level, that Republicans could propose? And maybe Democrats would jump on board in order to spur economic growth in certain areas of the state. So I think they have to have a focus on opportunity and an optimistic approach and say, look, we're going to stand up against things when you're wrong, but we also have to have a vision and we have to have issues that we're pushing for. And then, when the Democrats overreach, which they absolutely will, is the alternative something that voters want to move towards? And I think that's a years-long process, and it starts now.
Michael Fields, Executive Director of Colorado Rising Action. Really appreciate the time. Thanks for joining us, and best of luck pushing this agenda.
Thanks, Jimmy. Merry Christmas.
Merry Christmas to you as well.